Well, I'm back in the hot tub, and I'm talking to conservatives, or people who suffer from conservative thoughts or beliefs. One of the funny things about people is sometimes they don't know they're conservative. In response to my show, sometimes people say things like, well, that doesn't sound conservative to me. This next story takes place at a dinner party I attended a few months ago. The host is an older lady. I've been friends with her for about 10 years, and she just thought it would be fun for us to get together, have some dinner, drink some wine, talk about Mexico, and play some games. She introduced me to one of her friends there, and there was also a gentleman there that I know from other social circles. This lady, let's call her Beverly. Beverly is a self-proclaimed humanist. She's a secularist. And for those of you that don't know, a secular humanist is someone who believes in science, or claims to. And they are also pro-social. They're pro-human being, or at least they claim to be. So for instance, when you hang out with a secular humanist, you're much more likely to hear things like compassion and empathy for, let's say, people crossing the border than you are for calls to violence against them or anyone else. One of the reasons why I joined the secular community in my city was because I wanted to meet more people like me. But one thing that's been very common through all of my interactions in the secular community is people like Beverly. So we were all sitting around a table, there was 4 of us, and we were all digesting a wonderful meal that Beverly had made. She was trying to quiz us to figure out what she had put in her chili that made it so good. Now, she loves Mexican culture and Mexicans, and so she used chocolate, of course, right? To make her chili have just the right consistency and just the right flavor. And honestly, after she told me that, I thought, yeah, that's right, that's what it was. I couldn't figure it out on the spot, but after she told us, it was obvious. She's a jovial person. She's easy to get along with. She's quick-witted. She's fun. She's a former psychologist, and she likes to engage in social interaction. Well, seeing as I was with a group of secular humanists, I thought, okay, I'm going to lament a little bit on some of the non-secular humanists I know. And so I did, and I mentioned how many of the folks on the right were like QAnon, and conservatives are generally racist, and they're generally sexist, and they all kind of fall into this gun-toting, it's okay to be either a child molester or to assault women or to whatever. We'll still vote for you if you do all those things as long as you believe in God and you're willing to push our agenda. I was lamenting this trend in the United States, and I was also lamenting specific examples of it. People I knew that were, for instance, supporting politicians that are known sex offenders or known criminals. And when I said that most conservatives fall in this category of conspiracy theory, QAnon, science denial, racism, sexism, pro-guns, etc., Beverly said something kind of strange. She got a little offended. She said, I have a lot of conservative friends, and they're not any of those things. She specifically pointed out racist. She said, they're not racist. I go on cruises with these guys all the time, and none of them are racist. We're friends with all different kinds of people. And I said, well, that's okay. I'm glad that you know a few conservatives that aren't. And I said, I didn't mean to offend you. It sounds like you're offended. And she said, well, I'm a little bit conservative too. I'm what people call fiscally conservative. Just to be clear here, when somebody says I'm fiscally conservative, they just mean that they align themselves with the Republican Party on all matters, but the only one that they own up to is fiscal conservatism, meaning that they want to spend less money, which is a known falsehood amongst Republicans. They talk like they want to not spend money. They pretend like they don't want to spend money, but the truth of the matter is very, very different. When the stock market crashes, they're very happy to spend trillions of dollars to bail it out. They just did that with COVID, and they're getting ready to do it again. As of March the 11th, 2025, the stock market is in free fall. And mark my words, once they start laying off everybody, which is always what Republicans do, even though there's a lot of other things companies can do to save money in times of need. But just wait, the stock market's going to crash, or it seems like it's going to crash. How quickly before the conservatives bail out the ultra-rich billionaires who own 80 or 90% of the stocks? Anyway, there's my prediction for the year. So Beverly's telling me how she's a fiscal conservative. She doesn't agree with, this or that, or she wouldn't vote for that politician that rapes women, the one down in Arizona or whatever. But she certainly agrees with them in their fiscal policy, and she knows a lot of other conservatives that are the same way, who don't get into QAnon and so on. My impression of what she was saying and the way that she got offended is that Beverly's actually conservative. She isn't just fiscally conservative. She is full-on conservative. And she's just afraid to talk about it in secular humanist circles because of how much of a stigma there is that comes along with it. And I said to her, Beverly, you may think that conservatives are not in alignment with, let's say, sexists or racists, but this ideology, the ideology of conservatism, always falls into that category. They're inextricably linked. There is no way to be conservative and just be a fiscal conservative, because you then have to vote for the guy in your state that sexually assaults people, and for whatever reason, the conservatives don't care, so they vote for him anyway. This is, by the way, widespread. And I said, I wouldn't be willing to trade my fiscal policy for human rights and justice. And the conservatives are willing to do that. They don't care about human rights. They don't care about justice. They don't care about bodily autonomy or any other humane thing. They're not compassionate and they're not empathetic. What they care about is one or two specific items, and they're willing to throw away the rest of their humanity just to get that one or two things accomplished. And in modern day conservatism, that one topic is abortion, or at least it was until it was overturned. Now it's moved on to bigger and, I guess, better things. Well, Beverly didn't like this. And she said, well, like I said, I am conservative, at least fiscally conservative, and I'm not a racist. And I said, okay, well, then that's good. I'm glad you're not a racist. And the mood sort of changed a little bit, and we sort of wound things down. Beverly's very socially aware, so she understood that her and I jousting back and forth for a little while wasn't really making anybody uncomfortable, but maybe it was time to move on. And she said, well, let's play a game. And so we did. And maybe 20 minutes passed, and the topic of real estate came up. Beverly is in the real estate business. She's been in the real estate business for a long time. Right now, she works as essentially a clerk for her children who own multiple rental properties. And she has a lot of friends who also own rental property. Well, during our conversation about rental property, she started talking about a complex that her friend bought in Chicago. And she started saying things like, yeah, that neighborhood really went to hell. And my friend's having the hardest time getting units rented and keeping units rented. It's just a shame, really. And we all sort of got into this conversation about landlording and about rentals and so on. And then Beverly, who claims to just be fiscally conservative and says that not all conservatives are racists, and certainly she's not a racist, responded like this. I said to Beverly, I said, oh, that's interesting. What is it that's causing such a problem there? Is it just the rents are too high or what? And she said, oh, no. Just south of this complex, there's a real bad neighborhood with a bad element. And I said, oh, okay. And that's trickling over into your friend's apartment complex? And she said, yeah. And I mean, and these people are horrible. She said, it's the blacks. The blacks are causing all these problems. And I said, the blacks? I said, did you just say the blacks are causing, as in African-American people? And she went, oh, yeah. When you go down there into Chicago, into this neighborhood, it's just the blacks are everywhere. And they cause all kinds of problems. And I said to Beverly, I said, well, isn't poverty really the issue? Not the color of their skin, not their nationality. And aren't we talking about, systematic poverty as opposed to a certain kind of person? And she said, no, in Chicago, it really is just the blacks. And she explained a few different things, trying to explain herself, trying to say how it's the blacks and why it's the blacks. And the other guy that was there, is a pretty funny guy, he said, what it sounds like to me is you just had this one problem this one time. He said, based on our conversation, it's not like all of us are having this problem, right? And I said, yeah, no, I don't have any problems like that. And the lady that she invited seemed like she was mortified. She was just sitting there looking at all of us like, oh my God, I can't believe we're having this real estate conversation and it took this turn. But that's largely expected out of conservatives. And it's funny the way that this all came together because I anticipated this. So remember earlier when I said that conservatives, or just sometimes people in general, don't know what kind of person they are? Well, I see this with conservatives a lot. They don't understand that they're racist. Beverly is clearly racist. When she looks at the problems of society, and in specific, this one neighborhood in Chicago where her friend owns a rental property, the problem isn't the systematic impoverishment of certain communities based on racist government policies like redlining, or the fact that, it's much harder for African Americans to get loans, to buy houses, or to go to school, or to get cars, or to do the things that they need to do. It's not the system that's racist and causing issues for African Americans. It's the blacks. The blacks are the issue. And somehow, to Beverly, this does not qualify her as a racist. This lack of self-awareness, this lack of understanding and self-reflection is very common with conservatives. And more often than not, when a conservative says to me that they're not something, they end up demonstrating within just a few sentences usually, but sometimes in the case of Beverly, it took about a half hour, that they are in fact those things. When I lumped all conservatives together, and Beverly tried to separate herself from the words she knew were bad. She said, well, I'm a fiscal conservative. I'm not a racist. I don't believe in QAnon. I'm not a gun nut. I knew there was a red flag and went off in my head. I knew that she was lying. And as soon as she got into this story about her friend's real estate in Chicago, my ears perked up, and I started to wonder, okay, is she going to demonstrate to me that she is, in fact, racist? Most of the time, people just don't know, or they don't seem to know, that they're racist, which is a weird thing to not know. I mean, the science has demonstrated that we're all racist. When they do scientific studies, this is peer-reviewed psychological studies, people are tribalistic, and tribalism is just a scientific word for racist or bigot. But people are bigoted. They are. They just are. They look at, black people or white people or whatever kind of people that they don't like in the pictures that they're shown in these psychological studies, and they think the worst of them right off the bat. We can show a history and an evolutionary path that explains our tribalism, but we all are tribalist. We're all bigoted in some way. Most of us are bigoted in lots of ways. I myself was raised by bigots. When I was growing up, everybody I knew was bigoted. Everybody I knew was racist. Everybody I knew was sexist. Everybody, all my friends' parents, my grandparents, all of my cousins, all of my uncles and aunts, some of them to varying degrees. I mean, some people were much less bigoted than others, but all the women I knew were sexist and racist. And when I say sexist, I mean against women. They were also sort of sexist against men, but that's usually something I see in younger women. And there's a caveat to being sexist against men. I'm not going to get into it, but for women to be sexist against men is slightly different than men being traditionally sexist towards women. I mean, let's face it, women have been treated like chattel for most of women's existence, or at least, since the Abrahamic religious tradition. And it's a little different for women to not trust men when they're raped and beaten and tortured and bought and sold and enslaved by men than it is for men to just sort of generally think women are annoying or whatever Bill Burr's talking about. You know what I mean? Like, there's a big difference between those two things. So I'm going to say sexist, but the women I'm talking about from my childhood, the women that raised me, are sexist against women. They're sexist against themselves. They're Christian sexist, essentially. They believe the Bible's true. So you can't think women are human beings when you read the Bible because they're not the same thing as Adam. They're definitely not God, and they're definitely not man. And they were only picked to be man's companion after man was digging through the animals that they had created so far and kind of wanted to fuck a goat, but then God was like, no, we're not doing that. And then God made Adam Eve, according to the story, of course. Very luckily, none of that ever happened. Very, very luckily. I'm very happy to report that none of that happened. Literally, none of it. But anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent here. Everybody is racist. Everybody is bigoted. It's just to what degree you are and to what degree you have gone through the required self-reflection and self-development to overcome your racism. So I've been through tons of therapy to deal with my racism. At one point in my, early teens, I was probably the most racist I've ever been. And I started to question that. I had my first biracial relationship when I was 11 or 12, or I might have been 13 and she might have been 12. But anyway, that was my first time into that world, and I then expanded from there and started asking questions. But I was still very much a racist when I was 15. There was just something different about me, and that's that I didn't really buy into it. But anyway, conservatives don't even know that they're racist. And I'm not making that up as an excuse, because it brings up an interesting question. At what age do we say somebody no longer has the right to be this ignorant? You no longer have the right to be ignorant. You no longer have the right to be not self-aware, right? Like by, let's say 30. Let's just arbitrarily pick a day or a year, 30. By 30, you should have relieved yourself of ignorance, at least to every degree possible. And at the very least, you should be able to understand that science and the scientific method is the path to understanding and to knowledge, and therefore to eradicate ignorance. If you're not completely cured of your ignorance, at least you know the way out by 30. But you should be fully self-aware by 30. And you should have been working on your understanding of who you are and who raised you and how they did certain things to make you into the person that you are. And you certainly should be aware of the person that you are. When I say I'm a racist, it's because I had no other choice. I was raised that way, and it was reinforced most of my young adult life. It wasn't until I got into my early 20s that I did any real psychotherapy work on why I was racist and how my path towards not being racist. And to this day, I'm an elderly man now. I still have racist thoughts, but I've engaged in specific behavioral changes to curb those thoughts and to recognize when I'm having them and to educate myself on why I'm stereotyping somebody or why somebody fits into a stereotype. A lot of this mystery of what is the real problem with society vanishes when you learn how society was actually put together and all the different things that people have done to hold other people down. So when my friend Beverly says it's the blacks and she's well into her 60s, I don't think that she should have the excuse, well, she's just ignorant or she just doesn't understand. And you're not allowed in your 60s to still be unaware of your own racism to the point that you'll speak out against being classified that way and categorized that way. And then within a half hour, you're spouting racist gibberish. At some point, we have to hold people accountable for the people that they are. And I say it's 30. At 30, you should have worked on yourself enough to get past all of this and to recognize the actual person that you are. You should know that you are bigoted and how you're bigoted and have a strategy for how to overcome your bigotry by the age of 30. So earlier, when I said to Beverly, all conservatives are racist. All conservatives fall into these categories. They all, subscribe to QAnon and conspiracy theories. They all care, worship guns. They all are in these categories. And when she protested this and then self-selected herself into that category, first identified herself as conservative, identified that she was offended that I had put a conservative in this category, and thus her in this category, self-selected herself out of that category, saying, well, I'm not those things. I'm just fiscally conservative. And then identified that she is, in fact, a racist and, in fact, conservative in the way that I was describing. That should have done something in her mind. There should be a conversation that she has with herself at some point after this exchange where she says, I guess I am racist. Why was I saying it's the blacks? I mean, there are people that cause problems in society. There's no question about that. But it certainly isn't the blacks that are the problem. And it certainly should be something that you see in yourself. You are a bigot. That's a scientific fact. How much you understand about your bigotry and how much work you do to overcome it and to employ a strategy to deal with your bigoted thoughts. Because here's the thing, no matter how progressive you get, no matter how self-aware and how enlightened you get, no matter how much work you do in therapy or through being friends with different kinds of people, no matter what you do, you're still going to have bigoted thoughts. You're still going to think things badly about people in general, as a generality. And it's just going to be your us versus them mentality. It's just going to be the way you evolved to be tribalistic. But what really separates progressive people from everybody else is that they understand that they're being bigoted. They catch themselves. They're self-aware of how they feel. They've done the work. They've done the therapy to figure out how to be self-aware of what you're feeling and what you're thinking, and understanding that those feelings and thoughts are racist in the case of Beverly. And then going through the work of rectifying that, of solving that. For instance, if I had gone on a racist tirade like this in front of a group of people that I respect, I would contact them either as a group or individually and apologize. I would say, I can't believe I did that. I said bigoted things. I said racist things. I'm embarrassed. I'm mortified. I'm working on it. I'm trying not to be that way. I'm trying not to think that way. And I'm just very sorry that you experienced it with me. That's a very grown-up, adult, self-aware thing to do. And that's something that would warrant respect from everybody that you apologized to. The other thing is Beverly should definitely be in therapy as it relates to bigotry. Seeking out therapy for specific reasons, not just going there and talking and saying, I'm sad. I mean, yeah, you're sad, but why are you sad? What's causing your sadness? And going there with a specific agenda to solve social issues that you're having. So you have to understand that you're a bigot. Then you have to understand how you're bigoted. You have to do all that through self-reflection, and then you have to go to therapy to figure out how to overcome it. That's what a progressive does. That's how progressively minded people react to being raised as bigots, right? I didn't get to choose who my parents were. I didn't get to pick all the people in my life who were bigoted and racist and sexist and taught me to be that way and reinforced it and so on. But I do get to choose to go to therapy and to realize how I am that way, where I got those ideas, and to overcome them. To go through the work to actually be a better person. Now, sadly, I don't think Beverly's ever going to get there. I don't think most conservatives are ever going to get there. But if a conservative wants to get there, they can and they should. And hopefully they're listening to this and they become inspired to do so. Thank you for listening to the Hot Tub Monologues.